Hello, welcome. Coach Vusi here. We are discussing Eco 10B and we will be covering study unit 5 and study unit 6 at once. Okay, this is the most part that you are interested in understanding. The calculations of the multiplier and equilibrium levels of income and stuff and the graphical representation. So welcome. Now, first, we're going to look at an economy without the government, which doesn't exist, by the way. But for simplicity, our knowledge has to grow from that point. So when we are looking at an economy without government, I'm going to go through the notes a little bit, but mostly it's going to be practicals. One thing you need to know, there are 3 flows in the economy, in the circular flow. You have production, income, and expenditure. So what you need to know is that production and income are always equal in the economy. But expenditure can either be equal to those other two, or be less, or be more or higher than the other two. So you have 3 possibilities. And you also need to familiarize yourself with the terms that are being used. So this always represents income. And then this represents income and production. And then this represents aggregate expenditure. And then what are the other terms? Okay. First, aggregate expenditure can be equals to production and income. Can be equals to, can be higher than production and income. And can be lower than production and income. I'll have to switch off my light. It's causing a reflection. Okay, hopefully it's still clear enough. So, these are the terms that we're going to be dealing with the most. Production and income are equal. Expenditure can be equals to income, and we call this equilibrium. We are using what is called the Keynesian model of the economy, or in the economy. So this is the main model that is being used in this module. There are many models, but we're focusing mostly on this one. And you'll understand that, anyway, as we start, catch this. When aggregate expenditure is greater than income, what happens in the economy is that there is more demand for goods and services than they are available. Remember, income and production is the same thing. There are more goods in the economy than they are available. So they say the levels of stock in the economy will decrease because expenditure is too much, which is an encouragement for producers to increase their production. And then this one is the opposite. Okay? When aggregate expenditure is lower than income, it means there is less demand for goods and services. So the levels of stock of goods in the economy will tend to increase because they are less purchased expenditure. They are less demanded. They will tend to increase, which encourages producers to decrease their stocks or to cut down on production, or discourages them from producing more. Okay? Please follow this. It's very interesting. Now, with aggregate expenditure, there are many components to it. First, we have consumption expenditure. We have investment expenditure. We have government expenditure. And we have exports expenditure, which is always minus imports from it, and we put them in brackets. So these are the components of aggregate expenditure. Okay? There's consumption expenditure by households, There's investment expenditure by firms and even private households. Investment expenditure simply means the purchasing of machinery and equipment and the building of factories and buildings and so forth. And then government expenditure can be either towards investment or towards consumption. But here, in this model, we'll assume that government is spending to consume. And then obviously export expenditure. It's when foreign people spend in our economy. And then imports. It's when we spend our money outside the country. We purchase goods from outside the country. So these two, we always minus them. And sometimes this one can be bigger than this one, or this one can be bigger than this one. And then we call this whole bracket net exports, because it's this minus this. What we are remaining with, we call it net exports. Okay? And then what else? Okay, cool. I'm gonna wipe off this. If ever you're taking notes, take notes, pause, take notes, and then I'm wiping off, and then we are jumping into the crust of things. Okay? Now, we're going to start with consumption expenditure. So we're going to deal with them one by one. We're going to start here, and then add this one, and then add this one, and then add this one in the model. Okay? These things happen at once, but for understanding, we're going to start with this one, and then this one, and then and so forth. So let's wipe off, and let's get into the thrust of things. I'm going to prefer to do this graphically first, and then we're going to do the calculations. Okay? Now, we have this Keynesian model called the 45-degree line. Okay? This is your level of income. This is your expenditure. This is your zero in this graph. Now, in this graph, you have this line, the 45-degree line. Okay? This line represents equilibrium, all points of equilibrium in the economy, where aggregate expenditure equals to levels of income. Okay? Now, I said we're going to start with consumption expenditure. If they say show this graphical, they say show with the use of a graph a situation in an economy with only consumption expenditure. Okay, consumption expenditure is divided into two. We have what is called autonomous expenditure. That is a portion of expenditure by consumers that does not depend on the levels of income in the economy. So whether people have income or not, they still spend. How come? Because people can spend from their previous savings, and people can also borrow to spend. So there is a portion of expenditure that does not depend on the level of income. How do we represent that portion? We represent it by a straight line. Why? It's called autonomous expenditure, and it's represented by a C with a bar on top. Okay? Now, why is it a horizontal line? It means that expenditure is existing whether the level of income is at zero, whether the level of income is here, whether the level of income is here, whether it's here. This expenditure exists. Remember, this is the expenditure line. This is the income line. So, when income is at zero, you have this expenditure already existing. Okay, cool. I know you're following. And then you have another portion of expenditure called induced consumption. This is the portion of consumption expenditure that is determined by the levels of income in the economy. When the levels of income are at zero, that expenditure is at zero. So its shape is like this 45-degree line. When income is here, When income levels are here, the expenditure is here. When income levels grow, the consumption expenditure grow, but this is the induced. It's induced by the levels of income. Can you see? So as income levels increase, that consumption increase. As income levels increase, that consumption increase. Okay? Sharp. I know you are following again. Let's do this. Income, aggregate expenditure, 45-degree line, 0. So we have shown the autonomous expenditure with a C with a bar. Sorry. And then that induced consumption, I said its shape, it's like this one, where A equals to income. Its shape is like this one. So when you add them together, by equation, you show them like this. You say a consumption expenditure equals to autonomous expenditure, this one, plus consumption with a little c, which depends on the level of income. This is called the consumption function. It's this consumption with a bar plus that portion of consumption that depends on the level of income. So when you add them together, what happens is that you will have a consumption function which is full. You will have something like that. Okay? What this means now is that this and this have been added together. This and this have been added together. So eventually, your consumption function is that one, if you cancel the autonomous one. Okay? I was just showing that the reason why your consumption function doesn't start at 0, it's because of the portion that is autonomous, that doesn't depend on the level of income. Hence, it starts somewhere along the expenditure line. It starts somewhere and goes upwards. And this is its function. Okay? If consumption was fully dependent on the level of income, the consumption function was going to start exactly with the 45-degree line. But because there's a portion that exists of expenditure before there is income, while income is still at 0, hence the whole consumption function starts somewhere and goes upwards. Okay? Now, this is our consumption function. C equals to big C with a bar plus little c next to y. This is our consumption function. What it means is that where the consumption function is crossing the 45-degree line, you are at equilibrium level of income, Y0. It's as simple as that. You are at Y0. Otherwise, your expenditure in full is somewhere here. So here, the economy, here you are at a point where A equals to Y. Here you are at a point where A is less than Y, because, let me see, because this is our A. And by the way, A also represents expenditure. It also represents this whole function in this case. Okay? But you will notice, as we're going to add investment expenditure, remember I said we're going to start with C and then add I and then add G and so forth and so forth. You will notice something. So, here you are at a point where A is less than Y. And here you are at a point where A is greater than Y. Where the expenditure is above the level of income. Here you are at a point where expenditure is below the level of income. Okay? So, this is when expenditure is big, it's a shortage of goods and services, too much expenditure. Here we are at a surplus space. Expenditure is lower than the goods and services that are in the economy. Remember, sometimes I'll say income, sometimes I'll say production, because that Y represents both income and production levels. Okay? Now, let's move on. Now, in this economy, let's add investment expenditure. Let's see what we have. Now, investment expenditure, before we add it in the graph, it does not depend on the levels of income. So it's going to be a horizontal line. Whether income levels are at 0, there is investment expenditure in the economy. Why? Because usually investments are done by borrowed money. People go and borrow $1 million to invest in a factory, borrow $1 billion to invest in a big project, dams and stuff, or to buy trucks, which are parts of investments, equipment. So your investment expenditure will be what does it depend on? If it does not depend on the level of income, it depends on the level of interest rates. Investments, interest rates, sometimes they use an R. So when interest rates, this is called an investment function. When interest rates are high, the investment levels are low. When interest rates drop, the investment levels increase. Can you see? So investment levels depends on the level of income, on the level of interest rates. So if they say show the relationship between investment and interest rates, this is what you are doing. It's called the investment function. Okay? Now, having understood this, let's take the investment function into the 45-degree graph. Because the 45-degree graph is made up of income and expenditure, the investment function will be a horizontal line. Why is it a horizontal line? This one we say investment, and also with a bar on top. Usually, sometimes they don't put the bar, but to show you why they put the bar, that bar represents expenditure that is not dependent on the level of income. Like there, in the consumption function, you have a portion that does not depend on the level of income. That's why it says a bar. Why is it a horizontal line? It means that whether income levels are at 0, investment levels are existing. Whether income levels are here, investment levels are existing. Whether income levels are here, investment levels are still standing still on the same point. Okay? Now, fine. Now let's add this investment function into the 45-degree graph. You have your level of income, you have your 0, you have your aggregate expenditure, you have your 45-degree line, which is A equals to Y. And then, remember, you have your C equals to C with a bar plus little c next to Y. This is a consumption function before we added the investment expenditure. Now let's add the investment expenditure. Let's see what will happen. We said investment expenditure will come. Whether you put it exactly there or you put it here, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the investment expenditure will be like that. Okay? Now, at first, your aggregate expenditure was there, right? Let me cancel this. Your aggregate expenditure was there. Then an additional expenditure was made through the investments, which takes this gap. This gap. But there was already an expenditure in the economy. So what is going to happen is that the investment expenditure must be added to this curve. It must be combined to that curve. What will then happen is that with the same gap of investment, this expenditure curve will shift upwards. Can you see? The same gap that investment was made has come to push this consumption expenditure curve upwards. So now they are combined. When you see me wiping without explaining why, it's because I need more space. So you have your levels of income, you have your 0 point, you have your aggregate expenditure, you have your 45-degree line, which is A equals to Y, 45-degree. Now, you have your consumption function. Okay, now we're not going to draw our investment function as a horizontal line. We're just going to allow it to push that curve upwards. Remember, our equilibrium level of income was here when it was only the consumption expenditure. Now we are adding investment expenditure. It then pushes the whole curve. It pushes the whole curve upwards, this same curve. Okay? Now this curve is called aggregate expenditure curve, with A equals to consumption. Now we are only taking this C. We are leaving that part, plus investment. Can you see? Because this C represents everything on the other side of the equal sign. So now, this curve was only a consumption function which is made up of these two. Now, since we added the investment function, which on its own is a horizontal line, but it must be combined with the existing curve. So it will follow that shape, but it will push this original consumption function upwards, and it becomes an aggregate expenditure function which now includes consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure. So the equilibrium level of income has moved upwards because there has been an investment that has been increased in the economy. Okay? Now, can you see how we moved from this one curve where it was only consumption expenditure to this new curve where now we have added our aggregate expenditure now consists of consumption plus investment. Okay, now before I go too far, before I complicate things, I want to show what will happen if we add the government expenditure, but we'll reverse a little bit back. I want to show what will happen if we add government expenditure. Government expenditure, again, like investment expenditure, is considered to be autonomous, meaning it does not depend on the level of income, whether income level is 0 or not. Like the investment expenditure, government expenditure will be a horizontal line. But because we don't want to put it on its own, we want to add it on other expenditures already of aggregate expenditure. So if we add government expenditure, this will push this curve upwards. And it will be named A equals to C plus I plus G. Can you see? The more we add another item of expenditure, the more the same curve is pushed up. And then this indicates what this curve is. This involves this and this. This now involves even more. And the equilibrium level of income is now there. It keeps on pushing up. Now this makes sense when you think about the fiscal policy of the government. When the government wants to boost the economy, it uses the fiscal policy. And the fiscal policy uses two main things, main instruments: government expenditure and taxation. So if the government wants to push the economy upwards, it's called an expansionary fiscal policy, it can either increase government expenditure. If it increases government expenditure, the whole expenditure curve will shift, causing the economy to be at a higher level, the levels of production and income. Can you see? Another option the government is to cut taxes. When it cuts taxes, the equilibrium level of the economy will come down. You will see when we include taxes, because you cannot speak government without including taxes. Okay? Okay, cool. We are wiping this off again. I gave you the terms that you need to know. Let's come back. Let's come back. Equilibrium level of income 0, aggregate expenditure 45-degree line where aggregate expenditure equals to income. Now let's say this curve is the whole expenditure curve, which is A equals to C plus I plus G. As you have seen it when we were pushing the curve up. Okay? And the economy is here. Graphically, let's say the government is applying an expansionary fiscal policy. It wants to increase the levels of the economy. It wants to increase the levels of the economy. What will government do? It will increase government expenditure. By increasing government expenditure, it means pushing up this curve. The equation is still the same, by the way. Didn't change anything. Only government expenditure increased. Can you see? The equilibrium level of income has shifted upwards. Can you see? Now, let's say the government wants to use tax. The economy has shifted upwards to this point. If government says, you know what, for this expenditure, we need revenue, we need to raise money. So let's increase tax. What the tax will do, the tax rate, remember it takes money out of your pockets now. So it will reduce the equilibrium levels of income backwards. How? This curve will not shift here. The inclusion of tax will cause the shape to be flat. It will check back the equilibrium level of income down here to a new level. So you will have this effect. Government expenditure increased the level of production and income to that level. But the introduction of tax made this curve to fall. Same point here, but it fell down, taking income from people back, because tax leave you with less disposable income. Okay, so this is the graphical representation. And then if we include tax, if we include imports and exports, remember there is this thing we haven't yet used. We said aggregate expenditure equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus Z. We haven't dealt with X and Z yet. So let's see what will happen if we include X and Z. Levels of income, 0 point, aggregate expenditure, 45-degree line. And then we had this situation before we included the foreign sector. We had this aggregate expenditure equals to consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure. Now we are finding ourselves at that point before we include the foreign sector. Okay, the exports are autonomous. They don't depend on the level of income. But the imports have two portions. They have an autonomous portion and an induced portion, like the consumption. Okay? So basically, If now we have x minus z, which is positive, exports are bigger than imports. Is it? Yeah. When exports are bigger than imports, what will happen? It's simple, the same thing. This whole curve will now move upwards because we have added net exports. But now the name of the curve will be A equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus Z. The only thing that these things keep on shifting the curve upwards. Okay? But imports also have a little effect, like if imports are bigger than exports, they will take the whole curve down. If imports were bigger than exports, they will take the curve down. The same curve with the same name of the equation. But it's a rare case. You need to master mostly the situation where the addition of the foreign sector, which is exports and imports, pushes the curve upwards. Unless they tell you that, or they show you with figures that imports are bigger than exports, the addition of these net exports will take that curve downwards. Okay? And don't forget, these are equilibrium levels of income where these curves are crossing each other. And again, the imports have an effect of reducing or lowering the shape of the curve. But anyway, I don't want to focus on that one. I think I've taken you through the economy without government, where it's only consumption expenditure, then it's consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure, then we added government, and then we added the net exports. Graphically, it's as simple as that. Now, let's look at the figures, the calculation-wise. You know this one is always in the exam. It's always in the exam. So now let's see. You need to catch these formulas because they will tell you about, let me just add another one. This C into Y, or this little c, marginal propensity, I'm not sure of the spelling, to consume. And then tax equals to T next to Y. Why? It means that tax takes a portion of income. That like the consumption function where you have C plus little c, which takes from Y, marginal propensity to consume, and then that one is the taxation. Okay? And then you also need to know Y0, as we have been doing it on the graph, means equilibrium level of income. And then you also have YF, which means full employment level of income. Equilibrium level of income, full employment level of income. Equation-wise, the equilibrium level of income equals to the multiplier times autonomous expenditure. That aggregate expenditure, but only the autonomous portion. The one that does not depend on the level of income. And then, what else? Let's go to the multiplier now. Let's go to the multiplier. Now we are going to the calculations. The multiplier is something like this, equals to 1 over 1 minus c. No government. It's a multiplier without the government. It's still the same multiplier, but we are adding the government, which is 1 minus tax. Can you see? It's still the same multiplier, if you cancel the taxes, can you see still the same thing? You only add a bracket of tax, 1 minus T, with government. Now, which multiplier is bigger? In the eyes, this multiplier is bigger. But with actual calculations, taxes reduce the size of the multiplier. This multiplier is smaller than that one. This one has got more complications, more things included, more items, but that multiplier is bigger than this one. So tax reduces the size of the multiplier. What is the multiplier? The multiplier, what simply means is that if you add or if you increase aggregate expenditure, maybe through government expenditure or investment expenditure, how much more will the income levels and production be affected? They get multiplied many times. They don't just, if you increase by 10 rand in the expenditure, the effect on the levels of income and production will not be 10 rand. Will end up maybe being 20 rand. So it gets multiplied, multiplied, multiplied. So that's the multiplier. We are using it to calculate by how much this thing was multiplied more times. Okay? Now, let's look at the multiplier with the foreign sector. We have the same multiplier of 1 minus C, that one, which now includes government, but now includes the foreign sector. This is the portion of the imports that is induced. If you notice in the multiplier, you have things that are induced, that are not autonomous. That's that little c. Here is it. And then that T, here is it. And then on the foreign sector, this represents imports. Everything where I said this one has induced portion, it comes and forms part of the multiplier. And everything else that is autonomous, you will not find it in the multiplier. You will not find the big C, you will not find investment, you will not find government, you will not find exports in the multiplier. These ones are autonomous. That's why I'm putting the bars on top of them. So your multiplier is made up of all these other variables where I said there is a portion that depends on the level of income. Obviously, tax depends on the level of income. If income levels are low, low taxes will be collected. If income levels are high in the economy, bigger revenue or tax revenue will be collected. Okay? So the imports depends on the level of income as well. Why? When we have more money, we start importing things from outside countries. We feel like, you know what, I want a Ferrari and it's not here, I can't find it here in South Africa, let me go and buy it in Germany or whatever. So the more income levels increase, the more we also import. Okay? I think I'm making sense with that one. Now let's do the calculations. Let's find examples and do the calculations. I wish I could store these multipliers somewhere, but let's wipe them off. Let's do a practical example that you will find in the assignment, but we're not going to base it on the assignment. Let's look at our study guide. Study unit 5.6. The short questions. They said calculate the equilibrium level of income in an economy without government and foreign sector. If, let's start with this one. The first one. C equals to 100 million. Remember, this C represents the whole consumption. No. It represents the autonomous consumption only. And then you have a little c, the induced consumption. And by the way, that little c is called marginal propensity to consume, if I didn't mention it. The tendency to consume, marginal propensity to consume. And the M for import represents marginal propensity to import, based on the levels of income, the tendency to consume based on the levels of income, the tendency to import based on the levels of income. So now this one, the little c, they say it's 7 over 8 equals to 7 over 8. Usually they bring this in a decimal format. So myself, I like changing it into a decimal, even if I find it in a fraction. And then they say the investment is 150 million. And investments equals to 150 M. Can you see that here you are dealing with an economy without government? We are starting afresh where we started, but now we are doing calculations. Sorry. This is autonomous consumption, induced consumption, or marginal propensity to consume, and then the investment expenditure. So now they gave you these things, and then they say calculate the level, the equilibrium level of income in an economy without government. My advice, always start by calculating the multiplier. Even if they didn't speak about the multiplier, calculate it, store it on the side because you will need it. So let's calculate the multiplier. First, 1 over 1 minus c. Remember the multiplier without government. So let's find our multiplier. I'm going to calculate going that way. It's going to be 1 over 1 minus our little c. Where is it? It's 7 over 8. But I want it in decimal. So here is my calculator. 7 divided by 8. It's 0.87. 0.87. That's the same thing there. Okay? Let's move on. We have our 1 over 1 minus 0.87. What do you get? Here. 1 minus 0.87. You get 0.13. 0.13. So our multiplier equals to 1 divided by 0.13. 1 divided by 0.13. Our multiplier is so huge because in practice the size of the multiplier I think is 2, the maximum. I'm not sure, but it's 7 point something. Whether it's 2 or 4, you need to double check that one. They also asked that question. Let me double check again. 1 divided by 0.13. You have 7.69. 7.69. This is your multiplier. Okay? Now, nobody asked you about the multiplier. I said it's the strategy I like using. What matters, the multiplier you are going to use, you will take from that information or what they told you. Because they said calculate the equilibrium level of income in an economy without government and foreign sector. So now, the formula for calculating the equilibrium level of income, there is it. Y0 equals to multiplier times autonomous expenditure. Autonomous expenditure. The consumption portion of autonomous expenditure and the investment function. So our equilibrium level of income equals to 7.69 times 100 million plus 150 million equals to 7.69 times 250 million $1,922. 1922.50 million. This is your equilibrium level of income. Graphically, this number is here, equilibrium level of income. Graphically, in this economy without government, where you have aggregate expenditure equals to C plus I. Okay? And then let's move on now. Let's do a calculation that includes the government. Can you see it's important to know the formulas? Formula for equilibrium level of income. But then how do you calculate it without first calculating the multiplier? That's why I said calculate the multiplier first. Okay? Let's look at 6.3 on the study guide. I think I saw something that we can use there. We need to do an economy with the government. Activity 6.3. Why am I not finding it? Oh, yes. Let's use 6.2. It's the same. Let's use 6.2. Let me see. Okay, let's use 6.3. Activity 6.3 short questions. Let's start with this one. Where autonomous consumption equals to 100 million and then investment expenditure equals to 200 million, if I'm right. Yes. And the government expenditure equals to 280 million. Can you see now we have the government? And then we cannot have the government without having tax. But let's first see if we have marginal propensity to consume. Our little c equals to 4/5, which is equals to 0.80. 0.80. And then our taxation is 1/6. So our taxation is 1/6, which is equals to 1 divided by 6, which is equal to 0.16. 0.16. Now, what are they saying we must calculate? Calculate the equilibrium level of income in an economy without foreign sector. Can you see, again, we are still calculating the equilibrium level of income, the same way we were doing. Bring this closer. The same way we were doing before, we are still calculating the equilibrium level of income. The only difference is that I always say start with the multiplier. Let's calculate our multiplier. The only difference is that our multiplier is now different. Let's see. Our multiplier with government will be 1/1 minus C as usual, but now with 1 minus tax. Okay? So let's move. 1 over this one, our little c, which is 0.8, and then bracket 1, this one, minus our tax, which is 0.16. Okay? Now, the tricky part here is which part are you starting with when you are calculating? Let's go. Let's go. Our 1 is the last thing we use, the one on top. So this one we don't use yet. 0.80 we don't use yet. You start with the bracket. Always start with inside the bracket. So inside the bracket you have 1 minus 0.16. 1 minus 0.16, you have 0.84. 0.84. Now, remember what the bracket says. anything on the left side of the bracket, you can open a bracket with it. You multiply this times this. Bracket means times. Before you use this one, mathematically, it's another story. It's called BODMAS. Bracket first, of what, and so forth. But anyway, the trick here, work inside the bracket, open the bracket next. That's what we are doing now. 1 over 1 minus, let's open the bracket, 0.80 times 0.84. We have 0.67, so we have 0.67. Now the maths is easy. Underneath you are left with 1 minus that thing. So again, the one on top is the last thing to use. So now, let's go. What's the answer here? 1 minus 0.67 is 0.33. 0.33. And then eventually you have your multiplier, which is 1 divided by 0.33. 1 divided by 0.33. You have 3.03. Your multiplier is 3.03. Okay? Now you have your multiplier. You can now calculate the equilibrium level of income. What is our formula? There is it. So our equilibrium level of income equals to A, which is the multiplier, times autonomous expenditure. Where is our autonomous expenditure? 1, 2, 3. There is our autonomous expenditure. The consumption expenditure plus the investment expenditure plus the government expenditure. So basically, you have your equilibrium level of income equals to your multiplier. Now you're substituting 3.03 times 100 plus 200 plus 280. I like to put this one in brackets. So there you go. You find your equilibrium level of income. 100 plus 200 plus 280. Here is 300 plus 2. It's 580 times 3.03. 580 times 3.03. You get 1757.40. 1757.40. By the way, these calculations that I'm doing, go and check their answers in the study guide. I didn't check them myself, because even if my answer can be a little bit incorrect because of the punching of the calculator, but what I'm teaching you is the how to fish, the formula, the strategy, how you move about it. Now, one last example. Let's look at 6.6 on the study guide. Activity, by the way, not 6.6 as per the points on the study material, but on the activities. 6.6a. Let's look at 6.6a. This one is going to be a bit longer, but it's the final part. After this one, we will have covered everything. 6.6. Given the following information, please look at it. I'm not going to write it down like I've been doing. There's a lot of it. 6.6a under short questions. Activity 6.6. Given the following information, autonomous consumption 100 million, investment spending 200 million, government spending 150 million, autonomous net exports 50 million. That one is X minus Z. Autonomous net exports. And it's positive. With a graph, it will shift the curve upwards. Okay? And then the marginal propensity to consume 8/9, proportionate tax 1/4, marginal propensity to import 1/6, full employment level of income 1.6 million. Okay? These ones we're going to answer all of them. But I don't think there's a need. Okay, the autonomous spending, the number one, autonomous spending. It's exactly you add the autonomous consumption, investment spending, government spending, and autonomous net exports. You have found it. So it's how much? 100, our A. It's 100 plus 200, which is 3, plus 150, it's 450, plus 50, it's 5. So we're not going to do that one step by step. And then calculate the multiplier. I'm interested in the multiplier. Now we have a foreign sector. So our multiplier will be 1 over, that is our multiplier, over 1 minus C as usual, but with government, which is 1 minus T. Now with the foreign sector, which is plus M. Okay? Let's calculate. 1 minus our little c, marginal propensity to consume. It's 8 over 9. I want a decimal. 8 divided by 9. It's 0.88. 0.88. And then I have my bracket here. And then I have my 1. And then I have minus. And then I want my tax. My tax is 1 over 4. 1 divided by 4 equals 0.25. 0.25. And then plus my marginal propensity to import, which is 1 over 6. 1 divided by 6, I have 0.16. Okay? Now, let's move. I said you start with the bracket, always. So you have 1 over 1 minus 0.88 into the bracket. In the bracket, we have 1 minus 0.25. We have 0.75. 0.75 in the bracket, and then you have plus 0.16. Now you open the bracket with this thing that is on the left side of the bracket. So you have 0.75 times 0.88. You have 0.66. I'm just holding it in my calculator. Everything else I'm bringing as it is, this one. But this one now I'm bringing its answer, 0.66 minus 0.66 plus what I haven't dealt with. Now it's maths, simple maths. It's this minus this plus that. Okay? So let's move. Our 1 still comes on top. So we have 1 minus 0.66 equals to something plus 0.16 equals 0.50, 0.50. And then 1 divided by 0.50, 1 divided by 0.50, we have our multiplier equals to 2. So, we are done with the first one, we are done with the second one. We're going to cancel the board. The equilibrium level of income, we're not going to calculate it. There is the formula. You're just going to add those autonomous expenditures, that 500 times the multiplier. You have your equilibrium level of income. Okay, let's do it. So, our equilibrium level of income equals to multiplier times autonomous expenditure equals to 2 times 500 million you just say 2 times 500. Don't punch all those numbers of millions. So you have 1,000 million. Okay. Sorry. Now, one more calculation that we haven't dealt with. One more calculation that we haven't dealt with. That formula. Now, the change in government expenditure required to attain full employment. So, let me wipe here. I'm going to leave this thing and the multiplier, because we need them. Okay? Because okay, let's come here. Now look, they are telling us that the full employment level of income, it's 1.6 million. Okay? 1.6 million. This is YF. This is the full employment level of income. And we have the equilibrium level of income. And then we have our multiplier. So they are asking, basically the question is asking, by how much autonomous expenditure must be increased to move from the equilibrium level of income to the full employment level of income. And the question is tricky because they are saying by how much the government expenditure must be increased. They can say by how much aggregate expenditure must be increased. They can say by how much net exports must be increased. They can say by how much investment expenditure by increased. Basically what they are saying is that by how much any one of the components of aggregate expenditure, any one of these, by how much it must be increased to reach full employment from equilibrium level of income. So basically what they are saying is by how much any of these must be increased so that the economy moves from equilibrium level to full employment level. So here is our formula. Those formulas, can you see, they are very much similar. No, this is not the formula. Sorry. Our formula is by how much the change in aggregate in this change, these triangles a change. It must change by how much. So the formula is a change